Hi, Ty.
Hey, how's it going, Greg?
Good. So we have another episode of Climate Basics, and
Woo!
Welcome to Climate Basics, a podcast about the global energy transition and the challenges countries face, presented in an optimistic and realistic light. Here are your hosts, Ty and Greg, and please remember to like and subscribe.
And today we're going to be talking about Japan and its unique challenges and opportunities.
oh boy, when you say unique, I mean that is a good word for it. So Japan. So everybody knows about Japan. Everybody tends to like Japan. It's a wonderful tourist spot, but they really do have some challenges with regards to the energy transition. So Japan is, I guess, a medium-sized country, about 125 million people, and
Mhm.
they are, because of their incredible dependence on fossil fuels, they actually do emit sort of higher than what their population might indicate. So they emit somewhere in the range of 2.2, 2.5% of the world's carbon emissions, despite their relatively small population footprint. So
That's right.
one of the stats that floats around is that they actually literally import about 85% plus of their energy needs, and they buy it from other countries in the form of coal, oil, and natural gas.
That's
And
right. They're burning every type of fossil fuel right now.
it is remarkable. And so maybe, Ty, what you can do is give our listeners a brief overview. Like it seems to me that we might want to split this up, Japan's behavior before World War II and then their behavior after World War II. But how did Japan get here?
Well, let's see. As a smaller Asian nation in the 1800s, they were at risk of colonization by Western powers. And their response to that was to basically isolate and engage in extremely rapid industrialization and reform. This was during the Meiji period before World War II. And really, they are a wonder story for catching up in hundreds of years of technological evolution within a generation or two. So
Right.
this stereotype that we have of the Japanese being quick studies, being good engineers, it comes from repeated incidents in history where they just caught up and then leapfrogged existing technology, starting with the introduction of muskets.
Right. And so if we talk about Japan in the say 40 to 50 years prior to World War II, so just the turn of the century into the 1900s, Japan, because they were concerned about a number of things, including the fact that they were an island, as you said, that they faced resource scarcity, they actually invaded and occupied a number of different countries. We all know that China and Japan have a long history of bad blood because of those adventurous activities by the Japanese taking over certain portions of China. But they
So
also,
delicately put.
but they also invaded and occupied Korea. They did Indonesia, Laos, Vietnam,
A fair
etc.
amount of the Pacific, yeah.
That's right, small parts of Russia or what have you. But that all changed, of course, and their attitude changed with their surrender in World War II, and then they embarked on a different path. So, regarding the energy use, what did they do then, Ty?
Well, as you put it, they basically ransacked the entirety of the Western Pacific for oil, amongst other resources. And when that unstoppable force hit the immovable object of the entire force of the United States Navy and development of the atomic bomb, they switched tactics to just buying that petrol from the US and other major oil producing nations. And
Right.
since then, they've experienced several booms of industrial production and have risen to be actually up through the 2000 aughts one of the higher per capita energy users. Highly industrialized, highly urbanized country that always focused on and leaned on advanced tech.
Right. And so you're talking about say through the 70s where they rose in consumer goods and then they broke in a huge way into the auto sector,
And then
which
electronics.
electronics as well. Yeah. And
Yeah,
so I recall the headlines in the early 80s where, publications would indicate Japan Inc. and talk about how Japan was taking over everything. And of course, in around the 90s, they stalled. And so they've been relatively stalled since economically. But in terms of their energy, they tried to address this after World War II by building nuclear reactors, didn't they?
they did. And that went really well for several decades, up until the tsunami that disrupted the Fukushima plant.
That's right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think they had over 50 nuclear reactors up until 2011 when that terrible tsunami hit them and caused all those problems with the nuclear reactors. And then, due to public support, the Japanese government pretty much shut down all of them or most of them. And in fact, they haven't really turned on they're in the process of it and they've turned on some, but from what I've read, there are maybe about 30, 33 that are targeted to be turned on, not all of which are turned on at current.
Yeah, as it stands right now, they experienced a shift kind of like France and Germany, medium-sized economies that were going the direction of nuclear and then backed off after popular mood shift on the topic. This happened after Chernobyl, of course, in Russia in the 80s, and after Fukushima in Japan in the 2000s.
Right. So here we are. Japan is a developed country, huge, uh, uh, sort of huge energy needs that are being met through fossil fuels. But let's talk about the challenges that they face. And I think
Mm.
when you talk about the challenges that they face for Japan, the biggest 800-pound gorilla in the room is the fact that they have a demographic problem, don't they? They have a bit of a ticking time bomb that they don't seem like they're going to get a handle on.
They have, in fact, the same demographic issue that most fully developed economies have right now. And it is that uh, if you fully industrialize and become a modern business market with good education for women, family choice planning, you are going to actually have a reduction in birth numbers compared to developing nations. And that is something we see across most of Europe, including where I am in Italy. They're scared about it all the time. The US and China are not that different. They are also facing population turning points. Uh, and the funny thing is here about being scared of a population decline is that we just spent 3 generations being overly alarmed about a population boom, right?
Right, right. But
So in both cases, the estimates of devastation because of this demographic change and in the past have ended up being a little overblown.
right,
What we're seeing is the normalizing, the topping out of a population growth globally that happened because of advances in agriculture and medicine. Medicine meaning there were more people that are old lasting, and agriculture meaning there are more people we can feed.
right. But in terms of Japan's particular dilemma, so their birth rate is low, as you've indicated. They also have, I think, the oldest median population, just beating out Italy, your home
Yeah,
residence. And so part of the problem that Japan has is that they're not producing enough babies to obviously increase their population or even maintain their population. They have the world's longest longevity by average. And
yeah,
to top it off, they have an immigration policy which, for the past 75 years, has basically just shunned foreigners. And so
yeah,
they have recently, and by recently, the past couple of decades, they've opened up some foreign worker skills exemptions and some foreign worker unskilled exemptions, but those are still very tight, not easy to
yeah,
get
they are.
through. And they don't seem to have a a solution to their population issue.
They don't. It seems like, according to most predictions, they're going to have a reduction in the most severe projections, possibly to half of the current population. That would be amazing to see, and I doubt it'll get that bad. Normally, with this type of thing, if they can achieve a reversal of the heavy urbanization and industrialization that's happened over the past few decades, I think at some point you're going to see people moving out to the country, experiencing the good life, eating the local cuisine, and making more babies. We just have to figure out what are the economic policies, what are the government policies that will allow that type of rural renaissance.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Some of the sort of official estimates says in 90 years they expect their population to go from currently 125 to about, like you said, about 50 million people. So it's such a drastic reduction. And so there are in their official planning documents, there are lots of references towards degrowth concepts. So
That's right.
shrinkonomics, shrinking cities, managed cities, that sort of thing. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a big fan. Uh, for me, degrowth is absolutely part of the long-term plan for most fully developed economies. A lot of people coming from a traditional economic background have very strong opinions on degrowth. The interesting thing is, amongst economists, there are people strongly for it and people strongly against it. One of the first things that those of us strongly for it will say is that we're not calling for across the board slashes to all production. We're asking for more efficient, optimal decisions in what we choose to grow. Growing things that increase access to medicine, education, and food for your population, that improves quality of life, and that means more people willing to think about making kids. You can solve the demographic problem by making life easier to live,
Right.
right? It doesn't mean that you're reducing all of your industries, just maybe subsidies for oil-backed industries and putting some of that money instead on green tech, right?
Right. Right.
So growth in isolated specific sectors that have a future, degrowth in industries that we had to scale back anyway for different reasons, including energy costs and energy supply.
Right. And so like degrowth as a word, as a political concept, is not a winner in the sense that it's so tough to sell people on the concept which degrowth tends to morph into, which is, hey, expect less or expect to do worse next year than you are economically this year. But that's not what you're talking about.
No,
You're talking about if you can grow your population, then great, do that. But if you cannot grow your population, then perhaps put in a bunch of energy to do this smartly, which is that you're facing a population decline inevitably. And so,
right.
for example, eco villages, which you talked so eloquently about in a previous episode, community energy, I mean, all the concepts of
Yeah,
sustainability which are out there, which are available, but you may as well embrace it if you are inevitably facing a population decline.
right. Degrowth is something inevitable. It's something that happens all the time throughout the history of capitalism. Most of the time, it happens in the form of a giant recession or a stock collapse, right? Other times, it happens because of a pandemic. But if it happens planned as part of a return to the land, as part of a economic reform, as part of a green energy package, then what we're talking about is not collapse and destruction and I don't know where I'm getting my groceries, but it's actually more local, cheaper produce that feeds your regional economies. It stabilizes and makes each region more economically energy and food self-sufficient, which is to say it has a stabilizing force on the global economy. Technically, some fully developed economies might see less GDP, but they'll also see increase in every other indicator that indicates actual improvements in human condition. What you want is to figure out what parts of GDP are essentially money that doesn't actually improve your citizens' quality of life, and not focus on growing those, and instead focus on growing the parts of their national economy that actually improve the conditions for the people in that economy.
Wait, are you giving the Japanese government, are you giving them the cheat sheet as to how to improve their population's well-being by perhaps targeting the 85% energy needs that they are getting from fossil fuels and perhaps directing to something else where they're not going to have to pay for barrel after barrel after barrel, day after day?
We have talked in the past about how smaller economies have the opportunity to maybe leapfrog and avoid some of the mistakes and pitfalls that some of the larger, more established nations have made. Japan has in the past shown this ability to take a tech that's coming onto the world stage and advance it in terms of production, in terms of efficiency, in terms of normalization of its use across the population. Japan is a tech leader. And right now, they're sitting on a couple really important energy technologies.
Right. Well,
Foreshadowing.
well, that's a lovely transition. So let's talk about then. Let's talk about the possible solutions that Japan can embrace. And so let's just deal with sort of the more established technology that they have here, nuclear. They turned away from nuclear in 2011, but they have been turning on their reactors since then. And despite the fact that there's uneven uptake amongst countries around the world, we do know that the Chinese are leading everybody by building nuclear reactors. South Korea is also building nuclear reactors. The US just built a nuclear reactor to finish down in the state of Georgia. So it seems that for Japan, I read that prior to the 2011 tsunami, they had 25 to 30% of their energy needs met by nuclear. So
Right.
so does that seem like a path forward for them?
Well, it's certainly an option. Japan, like Italy, with its aging populations and high amount of coastal area and giant fault line that causes regular earthquakes and volcanism, uh, both in both of those situations, you have this limit to certain types of development where you have to build for really, really extreme weather. That doesn't mean a tornado or something. That means what if there's a earthquake and a tsunami or a cyclone at the same time? What do you do with ocean swells of 100 feet temporarily? What do you do with the ground beneath your facility actually itself being long-term unstable? Uh, I think an opportunity in the nuclear space is to look at the smaller reactors that are starting to come into the market. People are working on thorium reactors. People are working on smaller networks of still fission reactors, but much smaller scale and much easier to manage than the giant behemoths that defined the 60s through the 90s.
Right. And so so with all these large infrastructure projects, I mean, Japan with their aging demographics also has a problem as to the willingness of their public to pay for these things. But it doesn't seem like they have much of an out unless they choose these technologies and just push forward with it. It seems that nuclear solves a huge chunk of their problem, that it's firm base load. It can provide a tremendous amount of energy. It can provide it perhaps at the locations that you require it. Yeah, and so I guess it's just something that they have to keep on pushing for.
I mean, Japanese culture has a unique relationship with nuclear tech, right? You don't have to do a film analysis of the Godzilla movies to understand that the bombings that the US did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki influenced the cultural understanding for that nation of nuclear as a tech. And I think that it's not just the tsunami and the one nuclear plant that they're responding to with this long-term cultural fear of relying too heavily on nukes. I think it's also a little bit the trauma from 80 years ago.
Sure.
So if they want to avoid leaning on nukes for that 25%, which is right now being filled instead by coal. So literally any other option would be a better plan.
Right.
But if they want to figure out how to get to net zero without bringing back a bunch more nuclear plants, they do have options.
Excellent segue. And so, what are these options that we're talking about? Maybe we can start with um, wind, and particularly, why don't we start with offshore wind? And so, using the water in close proximity to the coastline, what's available for them there, Ty?
Right. So Japan has actually already started building out offshore wind, and it should be said that Japan has kind of a unique geology compared to a lot of island nations. They have some very deep water very close to their land masses, and that creates a few unique opportunities and a few unique challenges. So the reason why you see, for example, in Europe, a ton of wind farms off the coast of Netherlands, Germany, and England is because in that corner between England and the European landmass, there's a large flat plain barely covered by water. In fact, during the Ice Age, it was a place of human habitation because it was land called Doggerland, right? So across this area during World War I and II, the US and Germany built a bunch of silly little bunkers that pop out of the water like little pillboxes just standing on stilts, right? That is a very easy place to put fixed structures into the soil beneath the water and then have your windmills just hang out on top.
Right.
Japan has great opportunity for wind, but it's not wind that's going to be moored to a large, expansive, flat, near coastal area. Instead, they have huge drop-offs where there's access to very strong tidal water forces.
Okay. And
So
so, with that offshore wind, then one of the technologies that's being discussed is floating
that's right.
offshore wind turbines.
Free floating, yes. And not only that, but combining free floating wind platforms with underneath the water, having actually generators for wave and tidal energy. So you've got a two-in-one package, collecting wind from the top, and as the water flows across them where they're tethered, that water pulling past actually generates a lot more force per meter.
Right. But so it's just remarkable what technology can do and what they are exploring. But these wind turbines, each individual wind turbine, they're just absolutely massive. They must weigh so much. I mean, it's when you watch the blades of a wind turbine being transported, you see that it's being transported on, the beds of these very, very, very long trailers. And you can just imagine sort of how big they are. How in the world can something so big, how can it float?
Well, they're put on platforms that are themselves highly buoyant and then tethered to the water. Uh, it's true that the largest traditional horizontal axis windmills that we're using right now are behemoths. And in fact, a challenge for long-term use is what do you do with those blades as they're retired? I've seen some amazing imaginative architecture experiments. People take the blade, cut out one section, use it as a bus terminal waiting area, right?
That's
Other people are
fantastic.
figuring out how to involve them in greenhouse construction.
Right.
So there are questions for horizontal axis wind turbines, that is the ones that spin like that. Personally, I'm a huge fan of vertical axis. Vertical
Okay.
axis turbines are generally what you find for higher energy areas, that is to say, where the wind is very forceful, or when you're talking about wave and tidal energy, where the water is omnidirectional, goes in one direction some of the day, goes in the other direction some of the rest of the day. You either need a reversible turbine exactly on the axis of that water flow, or more adaptive, you do a vertical axis turbine that just always spins in one direction, no matter what direction the water is pushing from.
Wow.
So I think for me, if I was in charge of offshore wind for Japan, I would be looking at vertical axis windmills because they are smaller components that are easier to recycle and a little bit easier in terms of maintenance because all of the mechanical parts are at the base as opposed to 100 feet up where you have to send somebody.
Gotcha. Well, so let's continue with this game then. So if you were in charge of Japan's offshore response, there would be a couple of other technologies that you would also want them to consider, right? You've talked about one briefly, but maybe you can explain a bit more, which is under the water, actually using the tidal wave energy.
Yeah. So there are turbines that you can put in place where you know the water is going to be passing nearby the land. Uh, Basically, to skip over a whole lot of hydroengineering, where there is land and land somewhere else, another bit of land, and there's a narrowing of what's otherwise a large regional force of water that flows through an area, that's where it's highest velocity, right? Smaller area, quicker passage. And in those spots, that's where you have huge amounts of energy potentially harvestable by underwater turbines. Uh, there's another technology that's related to this that is really one of my favorites. So, ocean thermal energy conversion or ocean mechanical energy conversion. Uh, this is
With a fancy acronym, right? OTEC?
yeah, OTEC
OTEC.
or OMTEC if you add the mechanical component. So this is I think, the energy production method of the future for all coastal communities. But Japan is in a unique position because of those deep drop-offs nearby their coast, uh, they're actually in kind of the best position possible to benefit from this tech. So how it works is you get water from the surface of the ocean where it's really hot, something like 20, 25, 30 Celsius. And then you also pull water from where it's a little bit cooler. We call it the mesopelagic. It just means the middle ocean. If you go down a few hundred meters, you start to get water that is closer to 40 or 50 degrees Celsius. So basically like 40 or
For,
50 Fahrenheit, 5
right,
degrees Celsius.
right. Close to
Uh,
4C, right.
yeah, so this is a 20 degrees Celsius difference in the temperature of the water between the surface and the middle. If you put those next to each other, you have an energy differential. So what that means is if you can figure out a way to exchange heat across your mechanism, you've basically got free heat energy. And how do we take advantage of heat energy? The same way for 200 years, we build a turbine.
Right, right. And so this is just sitting there. It's available. It's using seawater. It's just using what nature has given to you.
Yeah, it doesn't require rare earth metals. It just requires a bit of clever engineering. And very importantly, you need to be able to access deep seawater,
Right.
which Japan, again, is in this perfect position to do. So they actually are already hosting in a tiny village of 7,000 people in the corner of Okinawa, the world's kind of most successful OTEC plant already. And it's been going for more than 10 years with plans to expand their tech to neighboring island nations.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
One more thing I wanted to mention about OTEC is that in Okinawa, where they're running this plant, they've also figured out interesting ways to produce more services from one facility. So you have this water that you've pumped up from from the middle of the ocean, and it's highly nutritious and now has been slightly warmed by going through your mechanism. People are now using that for onshore aquaculture,
Oh,
which is to say, growing seaweed, growing clams, growing products for pharmaceutical and medicinal use, all from the extra water that's produced in this energy generation scheme.
wow. It's the technology that just keeps on giving.
And one more thing, because a lot of really clever engineers have been thinking for a long time. This tech has been out for about 130 years. They've been thinking about how to get it more efficient because it doesn't have great efficiency levels because you have to use some of the energy generated from the turbine to continue pumping the hot and cool water through your system. But in fact, there is now a ocean mechanical thermal energy conversion, which is to say you position your rig that's doing this energy production. You can repurpose shipping vessels for this. You position your rig so that there's tidal flow coming across it, and the turbine you get from letting the water pass underneath the ship is enough energy to pump the water from the mesopelagic. So you're actually getting free water transmission from the just latent energy in those areas where tidal energy flow happens. So Japan, again, is in this unique position to be able to do the most efficient version with the most extra profit-adding steps involved of a very promising energy tech.
Right. So it's the merging of two different technologies, as you had stated in a previous episode. So you use the tidal wave kinetic energy on this positioned rig, and then that helps you to create the thermal difference between the warm water on the top and the very cold water on the bottom. You had me when you talked about seawater and clams. I mean, that's fantastic. Any technology that can produce more of that, I'm in.
We need stable food supplies for the world, and especially for cultures like Japan that have traditionally gotten most of their protein from the ocean, this is just a win-win-win.
Right. Well, excellent. And so, in terms of other technologies, Japan has other options. And so, in terms of this, one of the options that they could pursue, and they have a national policy on this, would be hydrogen.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, as we've mentioned before in previous episodes, it's not just about energy production. The bigger part of the question transitioning to renewables is how do you provide baseload over time and provide energy peaks? And that means you have to have storage. So Japan has, as part of their national plan, a investment in hydrogen storage. That is to say, HFCs, ammonia, biogas, really rich and promising tech that people have been putting a lot of money in for a while now. And Japan, like with ocean energy, could stand to be a leader in this.
Right, right. And since they're paying so much anyways to import fossil fuels, going to a technology like hydrogen, which at this stage is expensive, but provides the flexible demand that fossil fuels would provide, it would allow Japan not only to produce some themselves, but also to diversify their supplier base for other countries that provide hydrogen as well. It seems to me that Japan, because of the national energy security problems and the significance of it, it seems to me that they would actually have the wealth and the need to pursue hydrogen despite the cost, despite the fact that it's not quite mature yet.
Yeah, and as you put it very well, because they have both the need and the capacity to grow, that's what makes them potentially a winner 5 years out from now, 10 years out from now, 20 years out from now. They might be at 10 to 20% renewable production right now, but because of that need to stop importing 70 or 80% of all of your energy from your allies, uh, they really have this potential drive to do dramatic change. And you already see that in their plans. They're planning on expanding solar, they're planning on expanding energy storage through hydrogen and looking into geothermal. And all of these together do have the potential to bring Japan to a net zero nation, especially when, and this is an interesting thing about that demographic shift. Did you know that Japan is post-peak energy?
I didn't know that. Post-peak energy. Okay.
They were at their highest both per capita energy usage and national energy production back in 2005, 2006. We're talking about a nation that has been growing its GDP in comparably with Germany or any of the other larger economies, but they haven't been doing it by increased electrification or increased energy use. They've been doing it by having stable companies that are well known, providing unique services that are almost without competition in a lot of specific sectors. They've led on robots for, I think, my entire life,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and so they've had this actual 20-year decrease in energy demand and 20-year decrease in actual per capita energy use. And for me, that is a winning story for degrowth because they continued to grow their profits, but without continuing to increase their energy demand,
Ah, lovely. Nailed it.
right?
So, let's talk about another technology that Japan could embrace at scale, and that's solar. And to me, at least, because I'm fairly agnostic, I realize that there are national security concerns, not just national energy security, but national security concerns with regards to any technology. And I realize, as has been written, that there are issues if you are adopting technology made by another country at scale. But solar has dropped in price over 90% in the past decade.
Right.
China is producing a ton of solar that their internal demand is not meeting. And so other countries, whether in the global south or otherwise, they are hoovering up, sucking up all of the solar that they can possibly lay their hands on. And good for them, because
Yeah.
for some of the countries that are poor, then they are
And
solving their need.
Texas.
That's right, in Texas. But yes, but absolutely. And so it is solving a need today, as in you can get those solar panels shipped to you today. And yet, Japan, as I understand it, they're very interested in solar. They've created a national plan to subsidize internal solar
That's
production.
right.
But it seems to me, given their proximity, that this is an option for them, isn't it, Ty?
They could, of course, seek out long-term business strategy of buying the tech from neighboring countries. I think if I was Japan, I would focus on domestic production because this is something that Japan has always been able to become a leader in. If they see a technology that is about to go boom, like, say, video game consoles when I was a kid, and they figure out how to be the lead in that. Maybe solar panels, it's past the point where you can. Maybe we've reached the most competitive tech for non-perovskite, non-carbon based, but silicon based solar panels. Maybe. Maybe they need to go on to non-REM based solar panels and look into even more subsidies across their universities for the next gen panels. Maybe, and this is my inclination, maybe they need to not focus as much on solar and instead focus on techs they could definitely become leads in, like tidal and uh, ocean thermal
OTEC.
energy,
Right, right.
OTEC.
OTEC. Yeah.
Uh, but if they do solar-based energy, then that means the creation of probably, I think, a Japanese production market for photovoltaic.
Right. Yeah, it certainly seems. I realize they are not the sunniest location, but in terms of the ability to produce solar, if anything has occurred over the past couple of decades, it's the fact that solar works in any location, basically. And so, yes, some locations are solar superpowers, but even other locations which are not solar superpowers, they use solar and they use it very effectively. It seems to me that Japan could also make use of it.
Absolutely. As I said, look at Germany, it's just a part of building buildings now.
Right.
Now, that said, maybe solar is only ever going to be 20% of their energy profile. That's okay if you're also building in tidal, wind, wave, and ocean thermal energy. If you have all of those together, each of them producing 5 to 20%, you could have a Japan that is post oil and zero emission.
Right. Well, I think we've almost solved Japan's problem here. One last technology that I'd like to talk about is geothermal. And so
Mm,
Japan, of course, is located on a fault or faults plural perhaps, but they are earthquake central in a sense. And so geothermal, perhaps you can explain what geothermal is and also just generally explain why Japan might be suited for that technology.
Okay, geothermal. Have you ever been to a hot spring?
I have. Yes.
Okay, great.
Right.
So this is something we've had since ancient times. Water comes out of the earth at different temperatures, and depending on the thickness of the earth's crust, there might be a fair amount of energy coming with that water in the form of heat.
Right.
And this doesn't just make for the best thermal spas all across Italy. It also provides an opportunity to make a large scale facility. Geothermal plants can be huge in scope and can power entire cities themselves. Uh, it's actually not too different from the OTEC. It's just that
Right.
the heat differential is between the surface and the energy held in the earth, as opposed to between two different levels of the ocean. In both cases, you're using the energy gradient to be able to produce extra electricity, usually in the form of a turbine with hot water.
Right. Right. Well, and it seems that geothermal is also a favorite, which is being um, talked about by the fossil fuel industry because they have the sort of the inherent advantage of being able to drill deep in order to tap whatever reserves. So the general comment is that if we can tap oil reserves or natural gas reserves, we can certainly tap heat. And so it seems to me that that's also a possibility to provide, as you indicated, large amounts of power, really just firm base load. And as long as you're not tapping too much, then it could be a supply which lasts for a very long time.
Yeah, no, that's geothermal when we're talking about grid scale. There's another type of geothermal that's used widely all around the world, which is at the level of your individual house that you own. And listen up, audience. This is where you could actually, again, make an actionable choice. So when you build a heat pump for your house, what you're doing is tapping into the inherent power of geothermal. Because the inside of the earth is roughly the same temperature, hotter as you go down, but actually thermally stable across the entire year, even only a few meters into the earth, you can take advantage of that. And before the air or water that goes to heat your house is heated in a furnace, it can instead be first pumped deep into the earth. Again, only 10 feet, 20 feet, 100 feet. You've got options depending on where you're living and how rapid the gradient of heat is, and then pumped back up into the house, heated for free, thus saving on your overall energy profile by at least like 30% for most heat pump setups.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's a way to save energy just by taking advantage of the heat that is right now being wasted underneath your house.
Right. Yeah. Well, with heat pumps, they also work in cold environments. So some of the Nordic countries have got very high penetration rates of heat pumps.
In fact, Iceland is a leader in geothermal, both for the house and for the grid scale.
Right.
And when you are, especially for like northern Japan, when you already have these pretty severe winters and a prevalent amount of natural hot springs, you've got so many particularly cheap options for local, domestic, and national level geothermal. So yeah, look into whether a heat pump is the right answer for you, especially our viewers in, say, Canada.
Well, thank you, Ty. I think that in terms of this, Japan, they're in a tough situation with regards to their demographics. And I think politically, they also have choices to make, which you read in the popular news, whether or not the public is willing to embark on these large infrastructure costs. But as you said, I mean, they're an innovative culture, they're an innovative peoples, and it certainly seems to me that they have some options here because everybody wants them to move away from fossil fuels. I mean, it's not good for them. It's other than, as you've said many times in the past, other than a few select stakeholders. It's really just not good for anybody. And a lot of their country wealth is just going out the door month after month, just paying for something that they could actually harness from nature.
Exactly. That's money they could be spending on tax breaks for new families to make more little Japanese people,
That's right. Well said.
right?
Yeah, excellent. Well, good stuff. I think that does it for this episode. Well done. Anything you want to leave us with in terms of parting comments?
Thanks everybody for watching. And yeah, we are available for helping you, your nation, your community figure out exactly what you need to do to get with the green transition.
Right. Amen. Okay. Thanks, Ty.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Climate Basics podcast. Please remember to like and subscribe and leave us your comments. We look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.